And we are so lucky to have him with us today. So I'm going to mute myself. Remember, mute yourself, silence your phone, etc. Take it away, Dan Barker.
Hey. Thank you, Ed. Do you remember when we met, Ed? I don't remember what year that was. Probably 80, late 80s sometime.
I don't know. We met a long time ago. I'm old and so are you.
There we go. I still haven't got the beard yet, but maybe I should take your example. And then there's Steve with his beard. We go back to the Lake Hypatia days.
Yeah.
The wonderful era.
Yep.
And Steve, didn't you drive me to the Atlanta airport once or something? Something like that. I remember meeting you there. And it's great to hear this true American accent that you all have. And, you know, I was born and raised in Southern California, and my dad has roots in the South, Oklahoma, Kansas, and that. And so I say the word insurance like Ed just said it, insurance. But when I came up here to Wisconsin, Annie Laurie says we're saying it wrong. It's insurance. And I don't know, is insurance more proper or is insurance more proper? You guys will have to tell me that. Let's have a debate. I haven't done 300 debates. I've done 139 since 1985. And that's only counting the public, formal, moderated debates. Of course, all of us have done many debates, you know, and I know Ed has done a lot of radio shows and Ed's done some debates. And if I were to count like informal radio debates or panel debates, it would be way more than 300, but just counting the ones that are formal, actual moderated debates. And I just got word last week that I'm invited back to Oxford to do another debate. And this will be, Ed, didn't you debate at Oxford, Ed? I think you did, or somewhere like that once yourself. So assuming there's no debates in the meantime, this will be debate number 140, which will take place in November, again sponsored by the Oxford Union. And this time, the debate is reversed. In 2012, the debate was "This House Believes in God." And we won it, as Ed said, by a vote. They voted by their feet. The people who exited through the proposition door, which means we believe in God, were 142 people. But the students who exited through the opposition door, which was our door, was 168 people. So by a vote of the feet of Oxford University, we actually won the debate. I say we because it was Michael Shermer and the philosopher Peter Mulliken. It's a 3 against 3 kind of debate, which is different. And it's more of a parliamentary kind of British thing, you know, where we had to wear bow ties and we toasted the Queen. I guess this time we'll be toasting the King and doing all that stuff. And during those kind of Oxford parliamentary style debates, any member of the audience is entitled to ask for a point of information or to interrupt the speaker at any time. So you might be preparing it and then audience members can interrupt and ask questions. So I plan, instead of 15 minutes, I planned a 10-minute debate last time, which gave me time to accept the interruptions and to rebut some of the things that John Lennox, the mathematician, was on the other side, and he was the only one who came prepared to debate. Anyway, this fall, assuming this all comes through, it'll be sometime in November, it'll be me and Michael Shermer again and Phil Zuckerman. They've invited Phil Zuckerman, the sociologist and author, to be a part of this debate. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And unlike the opponents, the three of us have worked out a strategy so that we could coordinate and not duplicate, so that we have actually do a debate that's organized. Last time, those three didn't talk at all, it seemed. They just sort of had 3 side-by-side speeches. So anyway, we're excited about preparing for this debate, which for me might be number 140. So Ed has his, what is your blog, Ed, called? The letters? I forget exactly. Anyway,
Letters to a Free Country.
Letters to a Free Country. So earlier this week, Ed allowed me to reproduce part of an article I wrote called Supernatural Evil. That is a chapter in John Loftus's newest book. He always says his last book, but it never is his last book. His newest book is called God and the Problem of God and Horrendous Suffering. And a lot of philosophers these days are kind of avoiding the phrase problem of evil, although we know historically the problem of evil is a big topic. Because what does the word evil mean? So now more and more philosophers are using the word suffering instead of evil, because I don't know if you would consider animal suffering to be connected to evil in any way at all, but it's suffering in the world, and why is that even allowed? And the question then was, what do we mean by evil? If you look at the Bible, you won't find any morality in the Bible. The word morality doesn't appear anywhere. The word moral doesn't appear anywhere. In order to know what the Bible considers to be good or bad or right or wrong or whatever, you can't just, there's no definition there. You have to look at the words and look at how they're used, look at their context. And believers are always telling us, well, in order to understand the Bible, you need to see the context. And actually, that's true within each book, obviously, within each chapter in each book. Although to them, the context is the whole thing, as if it was all one unit. So the only way to kind of understand what the Bible means by good and bad, right and wrong, how do you know what is a right action or a good action? What I did when I was preparing my book, God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction, I went through the Bible and I found every instance of the word evil and the word wicked. And those two words are related to each other, but they're not the same. Their usage is slightly different. Wicked is almost always used for human actions. Evil is used for human actions and godly actions. And so I totaled up, there's about roughly 1,000 times in the Bible where the words evil and wicked appear. And I looked at the context of each one of those and what they are about and what they're dealing with. And in the Hebrew Bible, that's the word Ra, R-A. Some people spell it R-A-H, but Ra. Ra is the word most commonly translated as evil, although some Bible translations use other words than evil. They sometimes use calamity or disaster or woe or whatever. They use other words to translate that word Ra, which charitably translators are allowed to do, because language is fluid and sometimes different synonyms can mean different things. And if you look at the same verse in the Bible where the word evil appears, if you look at it in dozens of different English translations, you will see different words in that slot. And that's okay. Sometimes different synonyms can serve different purposes, but it's not consistent. It's not consistent how the translators are doing that. So looking at the approximately 1,000 times in the Bible that the word evil in the original appears, I found out that the most common thing it's dealing with, what would you guess? The word evil is used in the Bible dealing with different topics. There's about 6 or 7 different topics that it's dealing with. What would you guess is the most common topic, the most common thing that is called evil in the Bible? Would any of you have any ideas? Oh, I didn't hear that.
Being disrespectful of God.
Well, you're right, Ed. That is one of them, but it's not the most common.
Something to do with sex.
Well, then, if there's no more suggestions, the most common issue that is connected with the word evil is idolatry. That's all through the Bible. Making false idols, worshiping false idols, not worshiping God himself, which falls into Ed's idea. But idolatry hundreds and hundreds of times is connected with evil. And in my book, Godless, I give many, many examples of that. You are an evil person if you've committed idolatry. But those of us who are humanists recognize something about that. Idolatry has nothing to do with morality. Idolatry is not some way that human beings are treating other human beings in a positive or negative way. What is idolatry? It's just failing to worship the one true God. And of course, in the Hebrew scriptures, idolatry was a big deal because they were surrounded by different religions worshiping different idols and different altars. And many of the genocides that the God of the Bible commanded were intent on not just wiping out the people, the entire group of people, either the city or the group, but also destroying their altars and their altars to Asherah and all these other things, destroying the memory, which is a complete genocide, not just wiping out the people, but any memory of their existence in history. So idolatry was the big one, and idolatry has nothing to do with morality or what you and I would consider human to human good or bad treatment. Who can guess what is the second most common thing that the word evil is connected to in the Bible?
Cussing.
No takers?
Cussing.
Oh, I didn't hear that. Cussing?
Yeah.
Actually, that does happen a little bit. You mean like taking the Lord's name in vain in the Ten Commandments? That does occur, but it is not the second most common.
I guess usury.
Usury? That hardly comes up as an evil. It is mentioned a few times, but in a biblical passage using the word evil. Usury is discussed, but I don't know if it's actually deliberately connected with the word ra. This is an evil thing. If there's no more takers, the second most common thing is the Sabbath, breaking the Sabbath. Next to idolatry, breaking the Sabbath is considered a horribly evil thing to do, that word evil. And we know that what the word evil means because the first time in the Bible when the word ra is used, the very first time is in the Garden of Eden, when God said that Adam and Eve should not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's that word ra, evil. And then later the serpent says to Eve the same phrase about evil. And of course, that's a very morally significant part of the Bible, if you're a believer, or those early chapters of Genesis. So we know that evil meant moral evil, at least in that context. So breaking the Sabbath, as we see in the Ten Commandments and all through the rest of the Bible, breaking the Sabbath is a big evil. In fact, people died from it. People were killed because they broke the Sabbath. One man was killed because on Saturday, on the Lord's Day, he actually was picking up sticks. And they found this man picking up sticks. And the Israelites said, oh, he was picking up sticks on the Sabbath. What should we do? So they went to Moses and they asked Moses, what should we do with this man? He was picking up sticks. We don't know why he was picking up sticks. We can guess maybe to build a fire to feed his family or whatever. I don't think any of us would consider picking up sticks to be a huge moral offense. It's what does that have to do with morality? But in fact, when I was a kid, we used to go camping on the weekends and we picked up a lot of kindling wood. So I guess my parents didn't know. They weren't very good Christians if they were letting me pick up sticks on a Saturday. So Moses said, you know what? This is serious. And so he said he has to die. So the man who picked up sticks on the Sabbath, they took him outside and they stoned him with stones that he died. Kind of a cute King James way of saying it. Somebody was put to death because they broke this law. Again, what does that have to do with morality? What does that have to do with what we would consider right and wrong or good and bad? Who can guess what is the third most common usage of the word ra connected to, besides idolatry and breaking the Sabbath? What do you think is the third most common?
Well, I was wrong the first two times. No way I'm going to try again.
Lord's name in vain?
Well, that's there, but that's not the most common. It's not even in
Maybe
the top. It's not even in the top 5.
Maybe it's time for adultery now.
Well, actually, no. Adultery's not very well anywhere in the list. In fact, adultery was often encouraged in the Bible. Adultery
Dan
was
thinking about the 10 Commandments, and going down the line in the 10 Commandments, maybe honor your father and mother comes into play here. Like if you're a very disrespectful child, maybe. No.
well. So number 3 on the list does not appear in the 10 Commandments anywhere. Although in general principles, you might say. No more guesses? This one was surprising me, how common this is. It's the prohibition against interracial marriage. That appears a lot, especially in some of the angry prophets. Some of them were so angry at interracial marriage that they would go up to people and tear out their hair, and they would, preach, and like these crazy street preachers, you would see some of them. And of course, the reason for that was that if you're going to marry somebody who's not an Israelite, you're going to be tempted to go away from the true religion. So that falls back to what Ed was saying earlier, disrespecting and not following the true God. Idolatry and interracial marriage are things that would pull people away from the true faith. So, and in the book, I list a whole bunch of examples of how interracial marriage was considered an evil. That word ra was used, an evil, horrible evil against God. I guess there's a fourth one. And what Ed said basically is the fourth one. Generally, the word ra is connected to disobedience. Disobedience to the commands of God were considered evil. So that covers a lot of different things. So you tell me how many of those issues that were just raised that the Bible calls evil or wicked, how many of them have anything to do with what you would call morality?
0.
0. Now, to be complete, there are a few places in the Bible where the word ra and evil and wicked do connect with human to human behavior, but they're very few. There are things like drunkenness, and there's a couple of not taking care of widows, for example, was a couple of places that showed up. That was considered an evil thing, not to take care of widows. So we might see a few cases where actually human behavior was involved. But in general, the words evil and wicked really are not moral words at all. They are all words as Ed said at the beginning, not respecting and not obeying in general the true one God of all times. So we hear people saying the Bible's a good book. I was down at some book fair, and it was a huge, I guess it was just a huge book market. I forget where it was, somewhere in the South, and everybody had their booths up selling their books. And so some local group, I don't think it was in Atlanta. No. Anyway, this was like what, in 2016. A local group set up a booth of Freethought humanist literature, including my book, God the Most Unpleasant Character, that had just come out. And so that was featured, and then I was one of the speakers at this event. And I remember this junior high kid walked by the booth with his mother, and he looked at it and he said, God the Most Unpleasant Character in all fiction. And he started laughing, ha, 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 that's true. And his mother said, yeah, isn't that true? Isn't that true? So I was walking, I went to get lunch, and I was coming back to that booth down the sidewalk, and I had to pass by the Gideon Society booth as I was walking by. Well, unlike all the other booths, these two Gideon guys didn't just stay in their seats. They come out into the sidewalk aggressively, sticking Bibles in people's faces. And I said to these guys, well, thanks, but I have a lot of Bibles and I read a lot of Bibles, but I'm an atheist and I don't believe the truth of it, but I believe there's an immense value in learning about human nature by the issues that humans were concerned about in history, and some of the some of the way they said it was very artistic and literary, and so there's some value there, but it's not a true book. And they were really angry. And they said, but it's the book, it's the good book. It's the book of morality. It's the book that teaches people how to live. And I said, really? Does the word morality even appear in the book? Well, no, but you can tell by the examples. And so I said, do you guys read the Bible? Have you read it? And they said, of course we have. These were sort of middle-aged or older men, you know. One of them looked like he was a football player. He was just a big, huge guy. And I said, oh, you've read the Bible? And they said, yeah, I've read it. And I said, well, then what do you think of the story of Phinehas? And they both looked at me. The story of Phinehas in the Bible. And they just looked at me. And I said, don't you know? And they said, well, we're a little rusty. And I said, well, you said it's the good book. And every word in it is really inspiring, right? Every word it is supposed to be taken. And you don't, the story of Phinehas is like a whole chapter in the book of Numbers. You don't know about Phinehas? They didn't know about Phinehas. So I tried to explain to them, well, Phinehas was dealing with the evil of interracial marriage, marrying outside of the true race. And by the way, picking one race of people as the superior master race is racism, picking one group of people. And at that time in history, racism wasn't so much a skin color thing. It was the different groups, the different races that you have. And the United Nations defines racism not just by, you know, by ethnicity even, or by skin color, but by what group you might be with. So you can be a racist. You know, people in Northern Ireland, for example, could consider themselves to be a superior because they were Protestants, or they were, you know, they were the Catholics, the green Catholics. And so I explained to them what the story of Phinehas was all about. How many of you know it? I bet you 2 or 3 of you know the story of Phinehas, don't you? No? Steve, didn't you go to Sunday school? Of course, I never heard that story in Sunday school either. Okay, so you should read it. It's a, I don't want to say it's a fun read, but Numbers 25. The Israelites were told not to mix with other people outside of the true Israelite race, not the true people, especially with their southern neighbors south of the border there, if you consider that a border, the Midianites. The Midianites actually had some connection way back to Abraham themselves, but the Midianites worshipped Baal. They did not worship Yahweh. They worshipped Baal Peor is what it was. And so Moses and God told the Israelites, don't you mix with them. Don't you fall in love with them. Don't marry with them. Don't you do any, you stay completely away from those evil Midianites. And it turns out that some Israelites were mixing with them. I mean, as human nature goes, kissing cousins, you know, are gonna mix together. And so God was really angry, and he was like causing plagues against the Israelites for doing this thing, for committing the great evil of marrying outside of the group. And there was one guy who did mix with a Midianite woman, an Israelite man, a Midianite woman. Their name was Cosby and Zimri, and he brought her into his tent, into his Israelite tent. Well, the grandson of the high priest Aaron, his name was Phinehas. Phinehas was the grandson. He was also a priest. Phinehas was so righteous and he was so obedient to God's commandments that Phinehas picked up a sword and he ran into that tent and he stabbed and killed both of them, Cosby and Zimri, and he killed them in a bloody hate crime, basically is what we would call it, for mixing the religions, mixing the races together. What do you think happened to Phinehas? What would happen to a priest today who did something like that? If, I don't know, if an American Protestant went up and married a Canadian Buddhist or something. I mean, suppose something like that happened, right? And some righteous man of God were to go in and execute them. That would be a hate crime of the highest order. That would be an immoral thing to do. If we define morality as trying to minimize harm, basically, or lessen harm. But what happened to Phinehas? You can imagine what happened to Phinehas. God praised him. God rewarded Phinehas. And Moses even said, you are, for for keeping the race pure, for keeping God's commandments, he was elevated to a perpetual priesthood. He was rewarded for that bloody act of killing. So, in fact, some translations of the Bible pronounce it Phinehas, P-I-N-E-H-A-S. You might see it both ways. Usually it's Phinehas, who was of the priestly tribe. So Phinehas was rewarded. He was exalted. And so I asked these two Gideon guys, so what do you think about that? What Phinehas did, now that you know the story, you're in your own book that you're handing to people, what Phinehas did, was that a good thing to do? And they didn't answer. Was that a moral thing to do? And they didn't answer. They just said something kind of vague like, well, the Bible does sometimes report the, bad actions of human people. And I said, well, but this was God. God rewarded him and he spoke through Moses, and God rewarded him. And there's many, many other examples in the Bible, like with Jephthah. Jephthah, the general, he was a bastard child who became a general, who then wanted to fight the Amalekites. And he promised God that if you give me the victory, I will sacrifice as a burnt offering the first thing that comes out of my house when I come back from victory. So God gave him the victory, and Jephthah went home. And most of you know the story. The first thing that came out of his house was his daughter, his nameless daughter, by the way. At least when Abraham sacrificed his son, we knew the son's name, Abraham and Isaac. But this nameless daughter, who did he expect was going to come out of his house? The goat, or, the family cat, or what? It could have been his wife, And Jephthah got angry at her. Why did you do this to me? Why? This is horrible. I promised God. And you can tell this was not written by a woman. A man wrote the story. The girl compliantly said, well, if you spoke a vow with your lips to God, you have to fulfill it. And of course, so she submitted obediently. Even Isaac submitted obediently. He was going to lay down on the altar and let his dad kill him. But and so after she went away to bewail her virginity, whatever that means, she went away with her friends. She came back, and Jephthah did that. Jephthah then burnt his daughter as a burnt offering in order to keep his vow to God. Now, if somebody today did something like that, what would we call that person? By moral standards, that would be like Phinehas. That would be like committing a gross crime. And yet, what happened to Jephthah? Some of you know that story better than Phinehas. Jephthah was rewarded by God, and he became a judge after that. After he became this victorious general, all the parades, yay, we conquered the Amalekites. He became a judge, and a judge in Israel is considered a highly respectable position, and he was buried with honor in his hometown. So that shows you in context, if you look at the actual words and the actual deeds of these people, what the Bible considers to be good and bad. And there are many more examples we could give. The word ra in the Bible, if you see it, some translations change it, like in Isaiah 45:7, where it says, I the Lord God, I make peace and I create evil. Some of you know that verse. The God of the Bible admitting, I created evil. I create evil. And he used that word ra, evil. Some translations, like the NIV, they take that word ra and they say, well, it can't be evil because God wouldn't really do an evil thing, like morally evil. What it's meant by that is like natural evil, like calamity or disaster. So some translations, if you read them in English, say, I make peace and I create calamity, or create woe, or create different words they use. But what I want to know is, what difference does that make? If evil or immorality is acting with the intention of causing suffering, which is really the real issue behind the problem of evil is suffering, then what difference does it make if it's if it's like supernatural or natural or moral or immoral? People are hurting because of the actions of this deity. And the word ra, the word evil, is the perfectly good word for that. Here's just a couple other verses that use the word ra, and you may not hear the word evil, but the word evil is there, the word ra. Does disaster come to a city unless the Lord has done it? Therefore, thus says the Lord, I am bringing disaster upon them. Let me just skip. There's a whole bunch. There's like dozens of these verses. Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, you have seen all the disaster that I have brought upon Jerusalem, the Ra. Fierce anger, I will raise evil against you out of your house. Here's 2 Samuel. Thus says the Lord, behold, I will raise up evil against you out of your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes and give them to your neighbor, and your neighbor shall lie with your wives in the sight of this sun. So there's God endorsing adultery because this would be an evil thing to do. So God is seen all through the scripture as commanding, condoning, and committing evil and acts of horrible suffering against people. And it makes you wonder, why in the world would anybody call this the good book? So, I used to be a preacher, and I could go forever and ever, So maybe I'll force myself to cut it short here and open it up for questions. Is that what you want to do, Steve or Ed? Or
I think opening it up for questions would be quite appropriate, but I will start with a question. How, and it's important, Dan, I said at the beginning that you are a humanist, that you believe in respecting and treating religionists kindly. And you have shown me that many times. I remember somebody asked you to demonstrate speaking in tongues. And you said, well, I can do that, but I'm not going to do it because that would be disrespectful. It isn't arguing. You're a fierce debater. But to what extent should we rub the noses of the Christians in the absurdity of the Bible's notion about evil, and why?
Well, yeah, good question. I think there is a place for ridicule as long as it's minor and it's not the main thing you're doing. There are the word ridicule, you ridicule something because it's ridiculous, right? A talking snake is ridiculous. So you're not ridiculing the person necessarily, but you're ridiculing the absurdity of this claim that they have. But I think you're right. In general, none of us want to be ridiculed. None of us want to be laughed at. I don't know anybody who's going to change their mind because somebody laughed at us. I think psychologically, most people just dig in deeper if you laugh at them. And that's why when I walk home from work every afternoon, every evening, I often pass the Jehovah's Witnesses. And usually I just talk with them about nothing, not even about their faith, just to say, hey, you're a human being, I'm a human being. And then we just go. And they might bring up something and I'll say, well, I don't believe that. I don't think that's true. But I admire your dedication to your cause here. And they seem kind of happy that somebody's not screaming at them. You know what I mean? They seem kind of glad. And if somebody is screaming at them, it's more likely to be another Christian who's disagreeing with their theologies. So I know we're all different. When I was a young preacher, I know that if someone had ridiculed what I believe, outwardly I would have been fierce about it. I would have been strong. But inwardly I would think, well, wow, it would have made some difference. I would not have converted on the spot there, but it would have made me at least know that there are people who disagree with what I thought was so precious. So I don't know if this is a general principle of humanity or psychology, but I think the best way to attract people is by being attractive. You're not going to attract people by being unattractive. You might, who knows what their psychology is and what, that dynamic of their psychology and your psychology. But in general, I think if people see that we humanists, freethinkers, atheists, agnostics are happy and generally good people, and we're not all upset, and we're not living in despair. We're not seeking for peace to to solve the inner turmoil of our empty life, that kind of thing. If they just see that we're just normal, basic, fun, happy, loving people, I think that goes a long way. It may not win any arguments, but I think it does go a long way towards at least keeping the door open for dialogue. Some of them are going to be susceptible to dialogue. Many of them won't, and we don't know. Many of them just won't. And there's some people that are just, they're either so far in that they can't see another point of view, or, and this is true, although I hate to say this, they're just dumb. They're just not, they're just stupid. They're not thinking strong. And how can you reason with somebody who's just not reasoning, you know? So I don't think my answer to your question is that useful, but at least that's the way I would say it.
That's pretty much the answer I expected. Okay, we got one in the hall. Would you come up here?
My question for Dan is, what's the hardest topic to debate from?
Okay, his question is, what's the hardest topic to debate? Assuming we're talking about Christians and religion and not, you know,
As far as a specific.
flavor of ice cream or something. Okay. Toughest debate, Ben.
So I've just written an article about that very question. And
Why I asked.
yeah. And I'm looking for somebody it's a long form article. It's almost too long for a journal and it's too short for a book. So I'm trying to find a home for it. But sometimes publishers publish thin books, you know, little thin monographs, but so Christopher Hitchens was asked that question, and Michael Shermer agrees with Christopher Hitchens, who was asked that question. And I also agree with them that although this is not a good argument, this is not a great one, and it doesn't really prove anything, I think, and Hitchens thought, that it's the toughest one to deal with, and that is fine-tuning. It appears that the parameters and the constants and the ratios of all of the physical forces, and there's roughly 20 different forces, you know, the force of gravity and the strong and weak nuclear force and the rate of expansion since the Big Bang. And you know, these forces are, if any of them was off by the tiniest amount, life would not exist. And you know, great agnostic, atheistic philosophers have admitted that. In fact, Anthony Flew changed his mind toward the end of his life because of the fine-tuning argument. And it's persuasive. It's not really a deductive argument. It's a form of a design argument, basically. Simple design arguments are like, we've never observed the appearance of design without a designer. The universe appears to be designed, therefore the universe had a designer. That's obviously on its face, that's not very persuasive, but you can see that's not really deductive. There's a form of logic that, in fact, one of my previous opponents had used this word. It's abductive reasoning. It's not deductive or inductive, it's abductive reasoning, which if you strip it down to what it actually means, abductive reasoning means just, this is our best guess. An abductive argument is like, you know, appears to be a design, and you know, we haven't seen design. So it seems, unless you come up with something better, the appearance of fine-tuning of the universe to permit life looks like it was fine-tuned for us, right? So there are good ways to answer that. I don't know if you want to go into any answers to that, but in my mind, I think that's, and even Christopher Hitchens said, it's not a strong argument. It doesn't prove anything, but you got to spend time thinking about it. You know what I mean? You have to devote some energy to this fine-tuning argument because it has been so powerful. Anthony Flew, by the way, did not become a Christian at the end of his life, nor did he become what we would properly call a theist. His view was more like deism, like, wow, since fine-tuning makes it look like there must have been some kind of designer. He didn't believe in God, but he opened the door to the possibility that there was some deistic or impersonal design in the universe. So that's a tough one to deal with.
Yeah, Dan, I'd like to know if you've written any songs lately.
Oh yeah, I've been writing songs. The most recent one was "Thank You, Fauci." When Anthony Fauci retired, I had found an old Christian song that I had written way back in the 70s called "Thank You, Jesus," and it was never published, and I think for good reason. And I think I only performed it 2 or 3 times. We had a singing group and we sang a song called "Thank You, Jesus," and it's pretty silly. So I found that melody and I rewrote the words to say "Thank You, Fauci." I don't know if I can pull it off right now. Well, I sang it at our winter solstice gathering last December, because Fauci retired at the end of December. And so if you find that December 22 FFRF's winter solstice party online on our Facebook page or our YouTube page, you can hear me singing the song "Thank You, Fauci." And I'm writing some new songs for Godless Gospel. Some of you know about Godless Gospel. And we did the debut at our convention last October in San Antonio. And this is gospel music, as in black gospel music usually, although black gospel music can be sung by anybody, and many black gospel choirs have mixed singers in the group. There's a number of gospel musicians, including Andre Forbes, who is a former really big name traveling gospel songwriter, producer, arranger, who is now an atheist. And he was fed up with the hypocrisy, he's fed up with the lifestyle, he's fed up with all of that. And so he and I have spent the last 2 or 3 years writing new songs, totally new songs in a gospel style. And he was the perfect guy to know what that gospel style is. So we call it Godless Gospel. So these are not parodies. These are not like writing new words to ancient songs. We've written actually new songs. One of them is "I Don't Need Jesus." One of them is called "Honesty." One of them is "The Natural World," celebrating not the supernatural, but the natural world. We debuted it at our convention last fall. And if you want to hear the music, although the sound mix in the room wasn't the best, you can at least hear the whole thing. Just look up on YouTube, "Godless Gospel Debut," and you can hear the songs that Andre and I have written. And the crowd was crazy. Were some of you at our convention last in San Antonio? If you were, you would know that the whole crowd was just like, there's something about music and there's something about the emotion of it that makes you feel like there's something transcendent. Like if you go to a rock concert, if you go to some performance, there may be an opera, suddenly you're almost out of yourself with the group and you're feeling this, whoa. And that's why music is so important to worship services. Well, atheists can feel the same thing too. Atheists and humanists, we can get into the music and have the same tears and the same goosebumps and the same feeling like we're participating in something quote unquote spiritual when we know that it's just a natural thing. So for me right now,
does that mean I'm not a Tina Turner worshiper after all?
well, if you want to use the word worship in a purely natural sense.
We have a question from inside the hall. This is from Satan himself, clothed in, this is from Hallow of the Satanic Temple.
We look similar, I get it.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan. So I'm actually kind of surprised that your answer was the fine-tuning argument that was the hardest to have conversations or debates with. Because I was really assuming that the answer was going to be the same as my answer recently, which is presuppositionalism. Because even though it's a terrible argument, I have been getting bombarded with it with Christians nonstop, especially as I'm noticing the rise of Christian fascism rising. That argument is being used more and more because it amplifies that belief system. Do you have any words of wisdom that you can throw at us, people who are dumb enough to argue with these people, or to at least try to soften their belief systems? Because I'm not expecting them to change their belief in any way, shape, or form, but I am attempting to make them have that little pebble of doubt that they're true. And that argument literally is just a self-defense mechanism wrapped up in a blanket, wrapped up in under a rock. And I just don't know how to get them out of the sun.
So yeah, I have some words. I don't know if they're words of wisdom, but I have some words about it. I've debated a number of presuppositionalists, maybe 6 or 7 of them. And presuppositionalism is not an argument. It's more of a view. It's they make arguments, but presuppositionalism itself is not an argument.
Right.
Basically what they're saying, and I'm sure you know this, is that they are free to presuppose that the Bible is true, or to presuppose that God exists, because everybody is presupposing. How do we non-believers know that logic is logical? Don't you have to assume that logic is logical? Don't you have to just presuppose it? Because if it's going to wrap back around on itself. And so they will say, some of the arguments that presuppositionalists use are that our presupposition that we admit is not based on evidence, and it's not based on argument. It's just based on us assuming that it's true. Our presupposition gives better answers to questions than your presuppositions, for example, that logic is logical. So that's kind of the tack they take. And you're right, it's very slippery. And we're kind of forced into the position of defining and defending logic, which is kind of tricky and slippery as well. Most of us will say, I'm sure you say the same thing, that, well, we can test it. You know, we can test if the conclusions, not only are they logical, but are they sound? Because an argument can be perfectly logical and be wrong, depending on the correctness of the premises. If the premises are wrong, and in this article I'm just writing about, it's not really about the fine-tuning argument, but it's about what I consider a big fallacy, and I'm inventing a new word for it. And by the way, Steven Pinker, the linguist, Steven Pinker read a draft of my new article, and he said, that's excellent, this is profound, and he said, good luck with it. So is that a lot of these arguments that they use, and even presuppositions, will sometimes fall back on design, but they will say we don't need it. Sometimes they will fall back on cosmology, and they say we can use it, but we don't need it because we can presuppose the truth of the Bible, which makes sense. A lot of them are circular or backwards. It's kind of like the guy who's so impressed that how did they make all those rivers flow right along the state border? How did they do that? In order to make those rivers be so exquisitely fine-tuned to the borders, that must have been a huge civic undertaking with engineering and a lot of expense. Look how they did that. It's incredible. Well, that's flipping things around backwards. And the word I use is contradiction. It's contradicing the wrong way around. You know, if you've ever been sitting on a train and the train's not moving, and there's another train next to you that's not moving, and that train starts to move and you briefly feel like it's you who's moving. Has that ever happened to you? Or a car? Your brain got it backwards briefly, and you flip things around the wrong way, and you're looking at the whole world the wrong way. So I think in one sense, presuppositionalists are just doing that. They're flipping things around backwards, and they're saying, I don't have to prove this. I don't have to give evidence for this. I don't have to give you compelling arguments. I'm presupposing, and what I'm doing is no worse than what you guys are doing. And so presuppositionalism doesn't raise theism to a higher level. What presuppositionalism does is it drops non-theism or secularism down to their level, which means if the presuppositionalists are right, we're both really bad. It doesn't mean they're any good. It just means we're both being dropped down to this simple level of just choosing to presuppose what you want to believe.
Right. With the rise of like teal being raised around all the time now, though, how do you tell the difference between somebody who's using presuppositional arguments to just shut down the conversation and be trollish versus somebody who actually believes in presuppositionalism and thinks it's a good argument, and that's why they are presenting it as an argument? Because I couldn't tell the difference anymore.
I'm a bad person to ask because I don't get involved with the trollish universe. I'll look at Facebook or some of these things once in a while, but what's the point? You know, I mean, some of you are much braver than I am to wade into those waters. And so most of the times I debate, it's controlled, structured, moderated, sometimes on the street, of course. When I walk through the library mall, I've been walking that same path since 1988. And in the library mall, there's often these religious people out there. So I'll stop and talk with them, but not for long. You can't. And so I guess I would say, well, what you're proving is not that you're any good. You're just trying to prove that we're just as bad as you are, in which case we haven't got anywhere, have we? And if you're free to presuppose, so am I, which doesn't really get us anywhere.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, I have a question, Ed. I see one of the participants here is David Lee, and I wonder if that's the David Lee that I know from North Carolina. He's been a longtime supporter of FFRF. Maybe you can give a thumbs up or something if you are, or if you're listening. But or is David Lee part of your group?
David Lee is muted at the moment, but
oh, okay. Well, let's not embarrass him. I don't want to embarrass David.
well, if David Lee wants to tell us something, we'll be glad to hear it.
Yeah.
In the meantime, Eli has his hand up, although now he's unmuted. Eli, ask away.
Wonderful. I had a quick question regarding the argument of morality. I was just wondering if you were well versed in, other, books of morality as well, like the Koran, and how you would feel that. What would your opinion be on their stance of morality versus Christianity?
Yeah, I wouldn't call the Quran a book of morality. Neither would I call the Bible a book of morality. Although they claim that they have the answers to how we should live our lives. Both of them are books of obedience. And that's what the word Islam actually means. It's a book of obedience. And from their point of view, morality is like a little kid who does whatever daddy tells you to do. That's what it means to be good, to submit to the parent. And whatever daddy says, you're a kid and you're too stupid to learn on your own, and do what daddy says, and then you're a good child if you do what the father tells you to do. So, and I've debated Muslim, what are they called? Apologists, I guess you can call them, Muslim scholars. I've done 8 debates with Muslims, and in general, on the philosophical side of things, they pretty much do the same thing that Christian apologists do. They'll use design and cosmology. Although a number of Islamic opponents that I've had have used an argument that so far no Christian apologist has used, and that is the ontological argument. Some Islamic scholars think the ontological argument is valuable, and I was surprised to hear that a few times, which kind of just boiled down to the simple idea that God exists because we exist. Everything that exists within a context, within a frame of reference. Everything that exists is defined by something outside of itself. Therefore, God exists. I mean, stuff like that. Those are weird ones. But once in a while, the Islamic debaters will quote the Quran. One of them told me that one of the proofs of God is that the Quran is written in an Arabic that is irreproducible. You can't imitate, you can't duplicate, nobody can speak the Arabic in any other context. And this is proof that the Quran is divinely inspired by Allah. And of course, I gave a few examples. Well, Arabic is just a language. Arabic is Arabic. And you can say things in Arabic, and you know how you can speak in the style of William Shakespeare, or you could speak in the style of Dorothy Sayers, or you know what I mean? So you can speak in the style of the Quran if you speak Arabic in that way. So, but as far as morality goes, they don't have anything more to offer than the Bible does, except submit and obey, and then you're a good person by submitting and obeying God.
I see. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We have time for one more if somebody else wants to ask a question here or Zoom. If not, I must say, Dan, we had very high expectations and you exceeded them as usual. Thank you very, very much. And do, come to the picnic next August. We'd be glad to have you in person. It'd be lovely.
In
Thanks,
August?
Dan Parker. We appreciate it.
Thank you. This has been a real pleasure to talk with some real people. And if you want to know more about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, you know how to find us, ffrf.org.